It was raining the night they threw me out. I stood outside our gate with nothing but a torn bag and a silent scream stuck in my throat. My clothes were wet, my heart was numb, and my feet refused to move, like they were still waiting for someone to open the door again and say, "Come back." But the door stayed shut. Inside, I could still hear my mother's voice. Angry. Tired. Cold. "You're a shame. Don't ever come back here." That was the last thing she said. I had failed an exam. Not once, but twice. And in my family, that was the same as being a failure in life. My brother was already a rising star, perfect scores, perfect clothes, perfect everything. They called him the pride of the house. And me? I was the mistake they didn't know what to do with. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just walked away. The streets were quiet. Street lights flickered. My shoes made soft splashes in puddles I couldn't see clearly through the blur of tears. Then I passed a small electronics shop. In the window, a television was still on. CNN. A woman's voice said, "Some stories begin the moment everything is lost." I stood there for a moment, soaked and shaking. I didn't know it then. But one day, that same screen would show my name. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's listening to this story today. I still remember the way they looked at me when I dropped the test paper on the table. No one said a word at first. Just silence. Then came the disappointment. The anger. The yelling. My father's voice shaking the walls, my mother covering her face like I had brought shame into the house. My brother laughed under his breath like he knew this was going to happen. And maybe he did. They always said I was different. Too quiet. Too slow. Too sensitive. I liked books, but not the kind they approved of. I liked to sit with old people and listen to their stories. I liked helping the housemaid's daughter with her homework more than going to parties with my cousins. But none of that mattered. Not in my house. In my family, only one thing meant success: numbers. Scores. Ranks. I never had them. My brother always did. He wore his medals like armor. I wore silence like skin. They thought I wasn't trying. That I was lazy. Weak. Stupid. Maybe I even started to believe that too. So when I failed that final exam, I knew what was coming. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just listened. Every word hit hard. Useless. Shameful. You will never be anything. They didn't even wait for morning. That same night, they packed a bag for me and told me to go live with the failure I had chosen to be. I stepped outside with numb feet, wondering what exactly I had done wrong besides not becoming what they wanted. The streets felt colder than ever. I had no plan. No money. Just a heart that still refused to hate them. That's when I found this shelter. A small, quiet building near the bus station. I only walked in because the light was still on. I thought maybe someone could help me find a place to stay just for one night. But it became more than one night. The woman who ran it was kind. She gave me food, a place to sleep, and didn't ask questions. She just looked at me like I mattered, and after everything, that felt strange. Days passed. Then weeks. I found work sweeping floors at a tiny bakery. I'd wake up at 5, clean, serve tea, wipe tables, and go back to the shelter. That was my routine. No friends. No family. Just me, and the silence. But even then, I never stopped watching people. I watched how tired faces smiled when someone helped them pick up dropped groceries. I watched how one good word could fix someone's entire day. Maybe I wasn't smart enough for exams. But I knew how to care. At the shelter, there were other girls too. Some younger. Some with worse stories than mine. I started talking to them, listening to them cry at night, helping them write job applications even though my spelling wasn't perfect. Slowly, something changed. They started calling me big sister. They'd wait for me before dinner. They'd ask me for advice. They said I gave them hope. One day, a volunteer asked me to speak at a local youth meeting. I said no at first, who would want to hear me talk? But they insisted. So I went. I stood in front of 20 people in a broken classroom and told them the truth, that being rejected by the people who raised you doesn't mean you're worthless. That we are more than numbers. That kindness is a strength, not a weakness. I thought no one was really listening. But someone recorded that speech. A week later, that video started spreading. I didn't even know it had been posted. One of the girls at the shelter came running with a phone saying, "You're going viral." And she was right. People from all over started commenting, sharing, saying my words made them feel seen. Some wrote that they were in pain too, that my story gave them strength. I cried quietly that night. Not because I was famous, but because, for the first time, I felt like I had value. Not for my grades. Not for my looks. Just for being me. Then something happened that none of us expected. CNN reached out. They wanted to do a short documentary about my life, my work at the shelter, and how I overcame rejection. I thought they had the wrong person at first. But no. They meant me. The girl who once cried herself to sleep in a corner bed. The one her own family had kicked out without looking back. Now, someone wanted to hear her voice. And I still couldn't believe it. When I first read the message from CNN, I thought it was fake. I stared at the screen for minutes, not moving. My hands started shaking. I even asked the shelter manager to read it for me, just to be sure I wasn't dreaming. But it was real. They wanted to interview me for a special feature on youth voices who had overcome adversity. They said they were moved by my speech. That they believed my story could inspire others. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't ready. I didn't have fancy clothes. I didn't speak like those people on TV. I was just me. But the woman at the shelter looked me in the eye and said, "The world already heard your pain. Now let them hear your power." So, I said yes. The days leading up to the interview were full of fear and excitement. I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about everything, my past, my family, what I'd say on camera. What if I froze? What if I said the wrong thing? I tried to practice in front of a mirror, but the words never came out right. I felt small again. But deep down, something inside me kept whispering, "You've already survived worse." The CNN team arrived with cameras and lights. They asked gentle questions. I didn't pretend to be strong. I told them the truth. I told them how I felt invisible in my own home. How it broke me to hear my father call me a burden. How I walked out into the night thinking I had no future. And how, slowly, step by step, I found light again, not through success, but through service. Through helping others who felt like they didn't matter. They asked me what I'd say to girls going through the same thing. I looked into the camera and said, "Even if no one believes in you, be the one who does. Even if they say you're nothing, show the world what nothing can become." The interview aired 3 days later. I didn't watch it live. I was too scared. But then, my phone started buzzing. Over and over. Hundreds of messages, comments, emails. Strangers were writing to me from different countries, telling me my words made them cry, gave them courage, helped them face their own pain. People shared my video in schools, colleges, youth groups. Girls who had been through abuse. Boys who felt unloved. Parents who had disowned their children and now felt ashamed. And then something happened that shook me to my core. The president of the country, yes, the president, was giving a live press briefing. He was speaking about youth empowerment. I wasn't even watching, but someone tagged me in a clip. In the middle of the speech, he paused and said, "We must listen to those we once ignored. Young people who turned rejection into purpose." Like the young woman featured on CNN this week, her name is being whispered across this nation. She reminded us that resilience doesn't wear a medal. It simply survives, and shines. I dropped my phone. I didn't cry, not right away. I just sat there in silence, hands on my mouth, heart racing. He said my name. I had lived most of my life hearing my name in anger, in shame. Now it was being spoken with pride, in front of the entire country. The shelter girls clapped. Some were crying. One hugged me and said, "Now they'll see who you really are." But the biggest shock came the next morning. I woke up to missed calls from my mother. Dozens. Then a voice message. Her voice was soft, broken. She said, "I saw you on TV. I'm sorry." I sat there for a long time, just listening to it over and over. I didn't know how to feel. Forgiveness doesn't come quickly. And pain doesn't vanish just because someone apologizes. But hearing those words, after all the years of silence and hurt, it meant something. My brother sent a message too. Short. Cold. He wrote, "Guess you made it after all." I didn't reply. Not yet. I didn't need their approval anymore. But a part of me wanted them to know. I never hated them. I just wanted them to see me. Not as the failure. Not as the shadow of someone else. But as a human. A daughter. A girl with a heart that never stopped beating, even when it broke. The CNN video was still being shared across the internet when the email arrived. It was from the National Youth Conference team. They were inviting me to speak at a live event, one of the biggest in the country. Thousands of young people from different backgrounds, and government officials, even ministers, would be attending. And they wanted me to speak. At first, I froze. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. Me? On a real stage? Not in a small shelter room or a broken classroom. But on a national platform? I could barely breathe. I didn't think I could do it. I wasn't trained. I wasn't perfect. I didn't have degrees or awards. But the woman from the shelter said, "You don't need permission to tell your truth. You just need to speak it." So I agreed. The day of the event came fast. I wore simple clothes. Nothing fancy. Just neat, clean, and comfortable, because I wanted to feel like myself. When I stepped onto the stage, I couldn't see the crowd at first. The lights were bright, and my heart was pounding so loud I thought it might echo through the microphone. I took a deep breath. Then I looked up. Rows and rows of people. Some young, some older. All watching. My fingers shook, but my voice didn't. I began. I used to believe that I was born broken. That maybe I wasn't made for this world. That maybe, the way they looked at me, like I was a waste of space, was true. The hall was silent. I continued, slowly, honestly. But then I met people who didn't ask for marks or medals before showing kindness. They didn't care about my test scores. They just cared if I was hungry. Or tired. Or scared. That's how I learned what real strength looks like. I told them how I was thrown out. How I walked in the rain without direction. How being alone almost crushed me. And how kindness, simple, quiet kindness, became the reason I kept going. As I spoke, I saw tears in the crowd. I wasn't trying to be powerful. I wasn't trying to impress. I was just telling the truth, the kind people don't often say out loud. Then I said, "The world will always clap for the winner. But sometimes, the ones who fall and get back up again, they're the ones carrying everyone else forward." The applause started before I even finished. People stood. Cheered. Some cried openly. And right in the middle of that moment, someone important walked onto the stage. The president. I didn't know he was there. I hadn't seen him arrive. He walked straight toward me and shook my hand. He leaned into the mic and said, "This is not just a story. This is a turning point. This girl reminded us what it means to rise with grace. She turned pain into purpose, and gave a voice to every young person who's been told they're not enough. The room exploded with applause again. I stood there, not knowing whether to cry, smile, or run backstage and hide. I felt small, but in the best way, like I was standing inside a moment bigger than me. Later that night, I went back to the shelter. No limo. No hotel. Just the same quiet bed near the window. The girls there were waiting. They'd seen the live broadcast. They hugged me, screamed my name, played clips on their phones. One of them, a small girl who used to sit alone and never speak, looked up at me and whispered, "If you can stand there, maybe one day, I can too." That was it. That was the moment. Not the cameras, not the president's words, but that whisper. That was when I knew. I was no longer just a girl who survived. I had become someone who could help others survive too. The days after the conference felt like a blur. Newspapers printed my story. Online pages wrote about my past, how I was thrown out, how I started again with nothing. Messages came from schools, organizations, even strangers from other countries. People wanted to meet me. Hear me. Learn from me. But I didn't want to become someone who only existed on screens. I wanted to stay real, the girl who swept bakery floors, who sat with scared girls in the dark, who once cried herself to sleep because her own mother looked away. So I stayed at the shelter a while longer. I kept helping. I kept listening. I spoke at smaller events, helped the younger ones write their resumes, gave courage to girls who were too afraid to speak their names out loud. Then one afternoon, I saw a letter on my bed. No stamp. Just placed there quietly. It was from my mother. She had written it by hand. The paper was slightly folded, the ink a little smudged. She said she had watched every interview, every video. She said her hand shook when she saw the president beside me. She said she had been wrong, completely, terribly wrong. She didn't try to explain her actions. She didn't ask for anything. She just said she was sorry, and proud. I didn't know how to feel. I held the letter for hours. I read it again and again. Later that week, I agreed to meet her. We chose a quiet park, away from cameras, away from noise. When I arrived, she stood under a tree, hands folded tightly, eyes red. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then she took a step forward and said, "I don't deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know I finally see you." I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just nodded. We sat on a bench, and for the first time in years, she listened. Really listened. I told her everything I had never said, how it felt to be compared, to be invisible, to be thrown away. She didn't interrupt. She didn't make excuses. She just kept her head down and let the silence hold the pain. Before I left, she placed her hand over mine and whispered, "Thank you for not becoming bitter. I don't know how you didn't." I looked at her and said, "Because I met people who showed me something better than anger." That day didn't fix everything. We didn't hug and go back to how things used to be. But something important happened, we faced the truth. Together. As time passed, I kept building. I started a small initiative, just a room with a few chairs and second-hand computers. I called it Second Light. It was for girls like me. Girls who were called burdens. Girls who had been left behind by families, schools, or society. We didn't offer much, just a place to learn, to speak, to feel safe. But word spread. Volunteers came. Donations followed. More girls walked through our doors, scared, quiet, unsure, just like I once was. One day, a girl sat across from me. She had run away from home. She had bruises on her arms and no shoes on her feet. She whispered, "I have nothing." I looked at her and said, "That's okay." So did I. I watched her eyes change, from fear to something else. Hope. It was slow. Some days, I still doubted myself. Still wondered if I was strong enough to carry the stories of so many broken hearts. But I remembered what that little girl at the shelter once told me, "If you can stand there, maybe one day, I can too." that's why I kept going. Not to prove my family wrong anymore. Not to be on TV. Not to be praised. But to make sure no girl ever stands in the rain, begging silently to be seen, the way I once did. Sometimes, when I walk alone at night, I remember that first evening, the one where I stood outside my house, soaking in the rain, holding a bag full of torn books and shattered hope. I can still hear the door slamming. I can still feel the silence that followed. But now, when I close my eyes, I also hear something else. Laughter from the girls at Second Light. The sound of keys clicking as someone learns to type for the first time. Applause in a crowded room when a quiet voice finally speaks. The quiet thank yous whispered at the end of a hard day. My name used to feel like a mistake. Something heavy I didn't deserve to carry. Now, when people say it, it feels like light. The truth is, I didn't win a battle. I didn't get revenge. I didn't become rich or famous. I simply kept walking, even when I had no map, even when my legs were shaking. I kept moving because I didn't want pain to be the end of my story. And it wasn't. To anyone watching this, maybe you've been called a failure. Maybe you've been laughed at, ignored, or made to feel like you'll never be enough. I want you to know something: you are more than what they see. You are more than your lowest moment. You are not alone. Healing doesn't come all at once. Forgiveness takes time. Some people may never understand the damage they caused. But you don't have to carry that weight forever. Let it go. Not for them, but for yourself. There's strength in starting over. There's beauty in being soft after being broken. And there is power in choosing to rise, even when no one is clapping for you. So yes, they once called me a failure. But today, I wake up every morning knowing that I am someone's reason to keep going. And to me, that's more than enough. Thank you for being here. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs it. Like, comment, or subscribe, not for numbers, but so more voices like mine can be heard. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story. One girl. One light in the dark.